Okay, I want to go over this simple example from 8D.3, and I want to go over it even more slowly than I have in the past, because I think some of us are missing or not understanding some of the key moves that happen when we apply our strategies. All right, so here's the premises that we're given right here, 1 through 3, and the conclusion we're supposed to reach is not R. Now, I've told you before, I'll say again, don't just think about what rules can I immediately apply to these premises. If you just start applying rules aimlessly, you won't know where you're going or how. You're just going to, like, if you ever arrive at the conclusion not R, it'll be by blind luck. Instead, what you need to do is start with your conclusion, not R. Put it down here and think to yourself, here's the question you're asking, which rule can I apply that will give me not R as a conclusion? Okay, in order to do this, in order to figure out which rule you could apply to get not R and which rule is the most promising rule to apply, you need to know those rules really well. You need to know them by heart so that you can make the applications more easily. The truth is there's lots of rules that in all kinds of ways could give you the conclusion not R. So as you do this, one way you're going to be thinking about it is, well, how could I get the conclusion not R from somehow using the premises that I'm given? And as you think about this, you're going to think, where is R or not R in these premises, if it's there at all? And we see, oh, it's here. There's an R right here in premise 1. Now, what does premise 1 say? Let's look at this premise. Premise 1 is a conditional statement. Okay, how does that give us a clue about what kind of rules we might apply in order to get not R out of this premise? Well, here's what we're thinking to ourselves. Which of my implication rules or my replacement rules starts with a premise like this that has this kind of structure and ends with a conclusion roughly like this? And the answer is, well, the rules that start with a conditional statement as a premise, there's a few of them. There's modus ponens, there's modus tollens, there's hypothetical syllogism, but it ends with a conclusion which is another conditional statement, and that's not going to help us in this particular case. So really the two rules I'm looking at are modus ponens and modus tollens. And the rule that we're going to want to use is modus tollens. Now, that may not have been obvious to you, but let me explain why this is. Here's the modus tollens rule. Okay, it says if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Now you may think to yourself, premise 1 up here is a conditional statement, like the conditional statement in modus tollens, but this sure looks a lot different than what I'm given in the premise, right? Because the premise says if R, then parentheses P or Q. But that doesn't matter. What you need to do is identify the main operator of this premise in order to see what the real structure of it is. This is still the same structure as if P then Q, except instead of P, we've got R, right? And instead of Q, we've got P or Q. But the P or Q can function as a Q. So going off of that, if that's what P and Q are, then not P would be not R. And not Q would be not P or Q. That means that if we want to apply modus tollens to this conditional premise, if we want to come up with an argument that starts with this as a premise and make it a modus tollens argument, here's what it would look like. If R, then P or Q, that's what we were given. Instead of not Q, we've got not P or Q, and then the conclusion would be therefore not R. Now hey, as we see here, that's great because the conclusion we want to get to is not R. So we can have an argument that starts with this premise and ends with this conclusion, a modus tollens argument, and gets us where we want to go. So that's the one we're going to want to use. Now, we're going to use premise 1, but guess what? A modus tollens argument needs another premise. Look how modus tollens has got to go. Not only do we need this premise, we need this premise too if we're going to conclude to not R. We need somehow to get not P or Q. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that premise right here because I'm going to need it in order to conclude to not R. All right. Now, and whenever I know what number premise this is going to be, then I will I'll fill that number in right here. Okay, now we've got a question though. We're making progress, but now our question is, well, how am I going to get not P or Q? In order to determine that, we're going to apply the exact same process as we did with not R to not P or Q. We're going to ask ourselves, what rule will get us this conclusion? And more specifically, which rule, which will kind of play off of our premises here, will get us this conclusion? So as we think about that, we go back and we think, okay, here's this premise. Do I kind of see it located in the premises anywhere? Well, I do. Guess what? Check this out. Here it is. Not P or Q is one of the disjuncts in this disjunction. Now, here's the question I'm going to be asking. Which of my rules starts with a disjunction as a premise and ends with one of the disjuncts as a conclusion? That's right. It's disjunctive syllogism. Now, here's the form of disjunctive syllogism as you've memorized it. P or Q, not P, therefore Q. Okay. Now, in this case, the P is going to be equal to S. The Q is not P or Q, right? So that means that the premise that we need, we've already got the P or Q, it's here. The premise that we need is the equivalent of not P. Well, what would the equivalent of not P be? The equivalent of not P would be not S, right? Okay, so I can apply disjunctive syllogism to premise 2 and get this conclusion if I have not S as another premise. So I need somehow to have not S as a premise in order to use disjunctive syllogism. Now, ordinarily I might go ahead and say, okay, well, I've got to get not S somehow, and then apply the same process again. But guess what? I don't have to do that because they gave me not S already as one of the premises. Now, when you get to the point where all the justifying premises are already given to you in the given premises, that means you're done. All we have to do is list, oh, this is premise 3, right there. And now I'm done. And now all I have to do is number my premises and fill in any remaining gaps. Boom. Then I'm done. I hope that makes somewhat more sense out of the process I'm doing. I'm starting with the conclusion and I'm thinking, which of my rules will get me this as a conclusion? And in particular, which of my rules as applied to one of the premises or one of the parts of the premises will get me here? And then I'm thinking, what other premises do I need in order to apply this rule besides just the one I'm going off of up here? And then I plug that in and figure out, how do I get that premise? How do I get that premise? And I keep working backwards.